calling on the Federal Reserve to take action to prevent other countries from doing the same. So Argentina were originally exempted from tariffs imposed early last year. U.S. construction spending is down for the month of October. Most partner reports spending fell 0.8% over the month, due in part to a decline in construction of multifamily homes. The figure also declined in September. You're listening to Here and Now.
Good afternoon, this is Here and Now on 91.3 WBUR East to West. Acclaimed saxophonist Bill Evans will be performing live on Wednesday, December 4th in downtown Miami. It's all part of Miami-Dade College's Jazz and Wilson Presents concert series, featuring some of the industry's most recognized and respected jazz musicians. Concerts start at noon at Miami-Dade College's Wilson campus. For more information, you can visit mdc.edu/jazz@wilson.
Funding for Here and Now comes from the listeners of WBUR Boston and Geico, celebrating over 75 years of providing auto insurance for drivers across America. More information on auto insurance available at geico.com or 1-800-947-AUTO.
This is Here and Now. Winter storms are disrupting travel today on one of the busiest travel days of the year. AAA says 55 million people traveled more than 50 miles this year for Thanksgiving, and hundreds of thousands did so on Amtrak trains. Now, the U.S. government owns Amtrak, which is on track to break even for the first time ever next year. I spoke with Amtrak CEO Richard Anderson about that. He said the numbers have been moving in the right direction for some time.
We did improve to the best operating performance in history. We had an operating loss of $29.8 million, which was an 82% improvement over last year. And I think over the past 5 years, we've reduced the operating loss close to $400 million.
We talked about a lot more than dollars and cents in our interview. I asked him how he's approaching his relationship with Congress, a boss he didn't have to deal with in his last job as the CEO of Delta Airlines.
We've approached the relationship really by having credibility in doing what we say we're going to do, being able to be good stewards of the resource by having credibility on all the safety issues, by running a good railroad, by growing the ridership. Those are, I think, the most important parts of stewardship of this great asset.
One of the biggest points of the contention that you seem to have with lawmakers are these long-distance routes. Some senators have actually held up confirmation hearings for Amtrak board nominees because they're worried about your plan for the Southwest Chief, which is the route from Chicago to L.A. Last year, you wanted to break it up and replace nearly 500 miles of that route with a bus. Congress has so far forced you to continue the existing route. Is cutting back on long-distance service still a priority for you?
Well, we think the network needs to morph. But, on that particular route, we have over $100 million of investment that has to go into that route because we operate over a railroad that is no longer maintained by Burlington Northern Santa Fe. And it is an antiquated piece of track. So if we're going to have the same safety standards and quality standards, that's just a lot of money to put into a stretch of a railroad that has, I think, 7 people that get on and off a day on that little stretch. So what we were trying to be is good stewards and offer good answers. Perfectly happy to take the direction of our owners. We're working hard to grow ridership, and in fact, the long-distance network last year had a nice year of growth compared to history, and we project next year we're going to be quite aggressive about growing ridership and making investments in that. But everybody needs to understand those 15 routes take about $1 billion cash a year from our congressional grant. And we know there will always be an important place for the long western overnight trains, but there are a handful of those routes that are not even 7 days a week, that are 3 days a week, that could be put to better use, serving more people, because what we're supposed to do is serve people in America in an efficient, safe way. And we're merely trying to take a railroad design, and the railroad design we have today is really one from the 1920s, and understanding that Americans live in a very different way. And all the growth in our country has come in urban corridors, like the corridor from Boston to New York. And we want to be able to serve that and be relevant, because if we're going to deal with congestion, growing population, and the carbon footprint of automobiles, Amtrak is the best answer for intercity transportation in a 200 to 300 mile market.
Well, could you do what airlines do with unprofitable routes, which is basically tell the federal government or members of Congress, look, if you want to subsidize this particular route, go for it, but it's not part of our core business?
Well, no, that wouldn't be appropriate for Amtrak, because we have a statutory responsibility to provide intercity travel. We also have a statutory responsibility to minimize losses and run this like a business. So we're at an intersection of both a really important public policy role and the responsibility to be very good stewards. So we have to have good answers for rural communities. So we take that challenge, but the reality is that probably 90% of the people that get on a Amtrak train travel under 300 miles. There are only about 170,000 people a year that take a long-distance train end to end. But they're a very vocal group of people that, have this sort of historic view of the beauty of going 45 miles an hour on a train for a couple of days.
Have you ever taken one?
Yes, I have. I took them as a kid, too. My dad worked for the railroad. So, yeah, I have. And it's enjoyable. It's just that most of us in this day and age, air travel is cheaper and faster than the long-distance service. So if you avail yourself of the super low-cost carriers in America, you can get to Seattle for probably around $100, $120 at most on an airplane, or take 2.5 days and a higher fare to go on the train. So it's got to be experiential. And that's where we think we should make the investment, that there are these really sort of legacy long-distance routes that are almost like a part of the Smithsonian, that we should do a much better job with fewer of them, because we're going to need to buy all new equipment. And that bill is going to start with a B. So we're trying to weigh the demands to continue to serve those communities with a limited number of dollars for a railroad that has a $40 billion backlog of state of good repair investments that are necessary.
Speaking of the joy of taking trains, you recently decided to eliminate dining cars on some of these long-distance trains. You say that's because of changing consumer habits, especially millennial habits. I have to say, as a millennial, I took a train in Switzerland, and my favorite thing about it was the dining car. The food was amazing. Why not just make the experience better and make it as expensive as it needs to be instead of getting rid of the dining car?
Well, making it as expensive as it needs to be is a challenge. I mean, it is still a product that has a supply and demand equation to it. And so the issue is on the single overnight cars, right? Single overnight. The double overnight cars still have two dining cars, a cafe car and a dining car. On the single overnight cars, we want to go to a single dining car instead of two dining cars, and provide a much more flexible and higher quality food that can be eaten in your room, eaten in the cafe car, and that we give equal access. Remember, the dining car is a sort of an elitist institution in that sense, in that it's only for people that can afford the sleeping car accommodation, which is a very small number of people on Amtrak. And they like the exclusivity of having their own dining car. I'd like a more egalitarian situation on the single overnights where we operate a single car and it serves the coach people and the sleeping car people with a much more modern food offering.
I want to ask you just a couple final questions. Private rail competition. Virgin wants to operate a train between Miami and West Palm and soon Orlando. Are you worried about private rail as a competitor to Amtrak?
No, I think it'd be wonderful if we could have as much rail in this country because, you know, our mission and policy is to advance intercity rail. And I think that's good. It's good. It's interesting being an Amtrak because it's so complex. On the one hand, you have a policy consideration to provide intercity passenger rail mobility and minimize government subsidies and achieve maximum productivity and efficiency. So we have all these obligations with the end goal being to advance intercity rail transportation. If Virgin can do that, that's great for Amtrak.
You're on track to introduce the new high-speed trains on the Northeast Corridor by 2021, which will completely replace the Acela trains. How fast will it be to get, let's say, from Washington to New York?
Well, we should get speeds up in some sections to 160 miles an hour. And we want, you know, Washington to New York to be sub 3 hours.
You took this job on a 3-year contract for zero salary. Do you expect to stay beyond those 3 years?
You know, that's up to the board of directors, really. You know, it sounds corny, but, I was really fortunate to sort of not have a very good education and be given the kind of opportunities that I was given in, being from this country. And so all I wanted to do was figure out a way in retirement to do some sort of service since I'd never been in the military. So ultimately the board will decide what's in the best long-term interest of Amtrak in terms of continuing to sustain the progress the team has made, because we've pretty much hit every goal on finance, capital investment, safety, customer acceptance, ridership, operating earnings, balance sheet, positive train control, just go down the list. So we want to have continuity regardless of who's sitting in this chair against those goals so that we are good stewards of the mission of Amtrak and the assets and funding we're entrusted with by Congress.
That is Amtrak Chief Executive Richard.
About sea turtles or Boca's rich history. You can experience it all. For more information, you can log on to artsinboca.org.
Funding for Here and Now comes from the listeners of WBUR Boston and your NPR station. From MathWorks, creators of MATLAB and Simulink software for technical computing and model-based design. MathWorks, accelerating the pace of discovery in engineering and science. Learn more at mathworks.com. And Noom, offering a personalized weight loss program that uses psychology and small goals to change habits, with the goal of losing weight and keeping it off for good. Learn more at Noom, Noom.com.
From NPR and WBUR, I'm Robin Young. It's Here and Now. And for the first time in nearly a decade, the Supreme Court is hearing a case on gun rights, and it's a case that may already be moot. Here to explain is Emily Bazelon of the New York Times Magazine. Hi, Emily.
Hi, Robin.
And Emily, as you know, this is the first time they've taken up gun rights since a 2008 decision on a D.C. ban on handguns, and then a 2010 Supreme Court decision in which they said that their decision about D.C. applied to the whole country. In other words, they overturned the District of Columbia's handgun ban and said individuals have a Second Amendment right to own a gun in their home. This case they're considering is about a New York City ordinance which banned gun owners from bringing their legally licensed firearms into other boroughs of the city. But when gun rights advocates started to challenge that law, we understand New York City backed down.
Yes, that's right. So this is a pretty extreme restriction on gun owners, right? You have a license, but you can't take your gun anywhere, not even to a shooting range outside the city or like a vacation home. And so after this lawsuit was brought and after the Supreme Court agreed to hear it, New York City and New York State passed laws that invalidated this rule. And that's why the city is making an argument that the case is moot.
And tell us why they would do that. Why would New York City repeal their own ordinance?
I think it just seemed to them like not a very necessary restriction, right? If you have a valid gun license, is it really dangerous to allow people to take their guns to a shooting range or to another house? That seems pretty extreme.
Well, some were saying that the city scrambled really to repeal the ordinance because they did not want to see this go to the Supreme Court and maybe set precedent across the country, because lower courts have been ruling on gun rights in the last 10 years, and some, including some of the justices, feel that they've been ignoring the Supreme Court's D.C. ruling.
Right. Justice Clarence Thomas and lately Neil Gorsuch have been asking, really clamoring for a new case. And the other Supreme Court justices, as long as Justice Kennedy remained on the court, were reluctant to take one. Now Kennedy's gone, and it looks like the center of gravity on this issue has shifted. And what's at stake is that in Heller, the original 2008 decision, the court struck down what was basically a total ban on handguns in Washington, D.C., but it also included this language in which it said lots of other kinds of gun restrictions, like preventing felons or mentally ill people from owning guns, putting restrictions on sales, all the kind of modern era gun laws that have become such an important part of our political scene. They all seem to pretty much still be valid. And so now what's at stake is whether those gun laws, which have been a source of real political activism in the country in the era of mass shootings, whether many more of those laws will be struck down.
Well, so what do you think? I mean, it just would be an educated guess, but do you think that the court will go ahead and take this up, even though New York City repealed the ordinance the lawsuit is based on?
I mean, to me, when a city repeals an ordinance, that really removes the reason for the Supreme Court to be attending to the case, and they would be better off waiting for a law that a city or state wants to stand behind. But because there has been such an appetite for moving ahead on gun rights, it's entirely possible that the conservative wing of the court will decide to proceed with a ruling which really opens the door to striking down a much broader range of gun restrictions.
The New York Times Magazine's and author Emily Bazelon. Thank you as always.
Thanks for having me.
And you're listening to Here and Now.
After being deported from the U.S., a man died in Iraq.
Stuck to himself all day. God, please take me back home. Please, God. I don't know nothing over here. I'm scared.
And yet, U.S. immigration authorities continue to send back Iraqis who have not lived there for years or never lived there at all. Can they survive in a country they barely know? On the next Morning Edition from NPR News.
Join us in Morning Edition every weekday morning starting at 5 here on 91.3 WR.
I'm Jack Lepier's. House lawmakers today get their first look at the impeachment report on President Trump. Democratic leaders say the document will speak for itself as the House Judiciary Committee prepares to hold its first hearings on impeachment later this week. White House counsel calls the inquiry baseless and highly partisan. A panel of North Carolina judges says a congressional map drawn by Republicans will be used in next year's elections. The three judges say there's not enough time to consider arguments and get a new map in place in time for the vote next November. The World Trade Organization says the European Union is still illegally subsidizing Airbus at the expense of Boeing. The WTO ordered Europe to end the subsidies last year. The president cited EU support for Airbus as part of his reasoning for imposing tariffs on billions of dollars worth of European goods in October. You're listening to Here and Now.
With 44 students who are National Merit semifinalists, American Heritage has been named the top high school in Florida in nationally recognized scholars. American Heritage School has campuses in Plantation and Delray for students from pre-K 3 through 12th grade and offers over 300 courses including pre-medical, pre-law, pre-engineering, biomedical engineering, computer science, and the arts. Learn more at ahschool.com.
WLRN receives support from our community in a variety of forms, including the businesses and organizations that underwrite. The next time you do business with one of our program sponsors, let them know you listen too. And please thank them for their donation and support of WLRN.
Funding for Here and Now comes from WBUR Boston and Olin College of Engineering, celebrating Olin 2020, 20 years of integrating engineering with the arts, humanities, social sciences, and entrepreneurship, enabling students to design solutions to put people at the center of problem solving. Olin.edu. And Geico, celebrating over 75 years of providing auto insurance for drivers across America. More information on auto insurance available at geico.com or 1-800-947-AUTO.
It's Here and Now. Today, Lev Parnas, the Ukrainian-born businessman who claims ties to President Trump and definitely has them with Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, is appearing in federal court. He was arrested in October along with Igor Fruman. Prosecutors say they violated campaign finance laws against foreign money in U.S. elections when they donated over $300,000 from an unnamed Russian national to a pro-Trump super PAC. Parnas and Fruman also worked with Giuliani to pressure Ukraine to investigate Biden and his son. Giuliani denies any knowledge of wrongdoing by the two, but Parnas is now cooperating with the impeachment inquiry, and ABC News reports he's provided audio and video that feature Trump and Giuliani. So who are these guys? Tom Hamburger is an investigative political reporter with the Washington Post. So Tom, Giuliani says he met Parnas and Fruman when the two hired him in 2018?
These two characters hire Rudy Giuliani, America's mayor, to help them with a company they had started, one that they thought could help people secure their businesses and protect them against fraud. Their company had the unlikely name Fraud Guarantee. And the two met Rudy in mid-2018 and apparently hit it off, because what we know from multiple people who encountered them is that Giuliani, Lev, and Igor at times seemed almost an inseparable trio. They traveled together to
in the impeachment inquiry, which is the move to push out U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch. There is a witness. This is Dale Perry, an American businessman who was close to the top official at Naftogaz. This is the Ukrainian national gas company. And this businessman, Dale Perry, claimed to overhear Parnas and Fruman's conversation with Naftogaz, in which they were trying to pitch their global energy producers business to Naftogaz, and that they hope to see new leadership at the company soon, and that someone who opposed replacing the company's chief executive would soon be gone, and that somebody was the Ambassador Yovanovitch. I mean, this just gets, we need a whiteboard here, but yes. Apparently they knew in advance that the ambassador was going to be out and there was going to be a clear path to new leadership at the National Gas Company.
The plot thickens considerably when you get into this aspect of Lev and Igor's business. And they were specifically seeking to break into Ukraine's lucrative natural gas market. Natural gas has, in Ukraine's recent history, been identified as a source of fraud and corruption. And Ambassador Yovanovitch made it her business, as U.S. policy has directed, to deter corruption by keeping that gas company independent of corrupt influences. And so she was known to be a defender of the current regime governing Naftogaz. Lev and Igor, according to a witness at a meeting that occurred in Houston, Texas in 2019, discussed replacing that CEO. If that individual were replaced, it was viewed by U.S. policy as a blow to the anti-corruption policy priority. So Lev and Igor began talking about the ambassador as someone who was a hurdle to their goals. And they complained about this ambassador, as did Rudy Giuliani, and they told people starting in late 2018 that she would be gone soon. A year later, in May 2019, she was gone. And this, too, is an area that prosecutors in New York have been looking at. We know that because executives of Naftogaz have been asked to come to New York and talk with prosecutors. What do they know about Levin Igor's efforts to replace the Naftogaz board? And what was Rudy Giuliani's role, if any, in that enterprise?
Look, there are so many threads here, but the one that people might be most familiar with is the one that brings us to the push to investigate the Bidens. Lev Parnas says he's the one who set up a call for Rudy Giuliani with Viktor Shokin. That's the Ukrainian prosecutor that Biden helped force out. The international thinking was that Shokin was corrupt, but Parnas set up a meeting with Giuliani and Shokin. Shokin claims that he was forced out because Joe Biden's son, Hunter, was on the board of a company that he was supposed to be investigating. Again, the world thinking was that he wasn't doing the investigating of corruption he was supposed to. So Parnas has a link there with Giuliani and also with the president. I mean, there are pictures of Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman with President Trump at a White House